On today's episode of Homestead Coffee Talk, we are going to discuss some of the considerations you need to keep in mind when you are planning to start a vegetable garden. Welcome to Blooming Wildwood Homestead. On today's episode of Coffee Talk, we have a great topic to discuss. So grab your coffee, tea, water, whatever you're drinking this morning, and let's dive into this conversation. One of the things that I've been talking about is finding ways to use your fall and winter time productively. One of those ways is to go ahead and start planning your vegetable garden. I know that it might seem kind of strange to do your planning now when a lot of times we're starting our garden in the spring and summertime. However, I guarantee you that if you start thinking through some of these things and start planning for it now, it's going to really set you up to be in a good position when you get ready to plant your garden during gardening season. I know that it can be really stressful if you haven't done any of the considerations that we're going to talk about today, and it's time for your plants to go in the ground and then you feel like you're constantly behind and trying to catch up with where you need to be, and then you feel like your plants are behind. I might know from experience just a tiny bit, and so I want to save you some of that hardship if you are brand new to gardening and trying to get started and making a plan for that. So even if you have had a garden before, maybe there will be some information in here today or some considerations that can help you to move your garden forward even more. The first thing that I want to talk about is location. If you have lived on the property where you're planning to start your garden for a while, I'm hoping that you've made some observations about just your sun pattern and which areas are maybe going to be most conducive for planting. If you want to extend your growing season, that becomes even more essential to try and notice the patterns in sunlight and what's going to get a lot of shade, and that can really help you to pick the best location for your garden spot. If you are brand new to the space and you're just wanting to get started right away, then try and consider maybe where you have trees or where you have other tall buildings that could potentially shade your garden area as the sun will move to different levels in the sky depending on the season. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we get a lot of rain, we get a lot of dark, dreary days towards the end of fall and beginning of winter and throughout the winter. And so it really does make a difference, just slight tweaks if we want to make sure that the garden area has sun. So just kind of keep that in mind as you are going through and trying to create your garden spot. When I lived at my urban location, I didn't have a lot of options, and so I put my garden and set it up in the only place that I knew was going to get enough sun during the summertime, and I was hoping there would be enough sunlight there for me to be able to do some gardening during the fall. However, what happened is during the fall, there were tall houses and trees and they shaded the garden spot, and so it just wasn't really very conducive to me being able to extend my season a lot. I was able to put in some things like some lettuce and some of those shorter growing crops, but then larger things, there just wasn't as much sunlight, and so that really made a difference. It was fine during the summer, during the late spring, but to try and extend into fall was really a challenge. It was the only space that I had available, and so I was able to make good use of that space. Had I had another option, I would have tried to move it to a location that was definitely going to have more sun throughout the entire season, because then it would have given me more flexibility. So just take that into consideration. If you have the option to put your garden in a different spot, think about your location and whether or not it's going to get sunlight throughout the range of seasons so that you have some flexibility moving forward. The second consideration that I want you to think about when you are planning to start your vegetable garden would be your garden base. And I guess that was the best way that I could kind of think to describe it. Maybe you might consider it your setup, what you want it to look like. That's what we really want to look at here. So what type of gardening space do you want to have set up? Are you planning to till a space? Do you have really good soil that's there and you're planning to do some type of tilling and you've got your plot already set up? Is that something that you're going to do? Do you want to set up no dig beds where you're going to put in some of that compost and dirt and maybe put some wood chips down in the aisle and try to go for more of the no dig method? Do you want to put in raised beds? If you want to put in raised beds, what kind of material are you going to use to get that set up? Are you going to use wood? Do you want to use block? Are you going to make it a single layer, a double layer? How tall do you want it? These are all things that you really need to think about depending on your situation and where you're at. Or are you going to be doing some container gardening? Maybe you're just starting out, and so this year you're not going to put in the big full garden, but you want to do some container gardening. So you want to think about what kind of a base are you going to set up and use for your garden. Once you have that figured out, it's going to help you to move forward in the other areas. Once you've planned what kind of a base or a setup you're going to have, maybe this might be a time to go ahead and start investing in materials. If you're making a raised bed, that can be some of the most expensive part of that, is getting the materials for the actual bed. So if you're starting early, you could start accumulating some of those supplies now and maybe even start putting it together if you have the ability to do that, depending on your weather and what you have going on. So just keep that in mind and use that to kind of help you move forward. The third thing that we need to think about is soil. So once you've figured out what the base is going to look like and what you want your setup to be, then you have to think about soil. So if you're going to use the soil that's already there, are you going to have to make some amendments to bring it up to the level that you need it to be? Or is it going to be sufficient the way that it is and you just need to think about some fertilizer options down the road? If you're doing raised beds, you're going to have to fill those beds with soil. So you're gonna wanna look at what kinds of options you have available for that as well. If you're putting in multiple raised beds, you probably are not gonna want to buy the bagged soil from the store, as that can be really expensive, and a lot of times it's a less expensive option to go to one of your local soil businesses. They sell beauty bark, soil, landscaping supplies, things of that nature, and purchase maybe a truckload or have some delivered to your house so that you have that available for your raised beds. And then look at the different companies, because every company has something a little bit different. We have several companies around here that sell garden soil, but they're all a little bit of a different mixture. So you might have a different mixture of compost to the actual topsoil or other things that are going into that mix. So you want to take some time to be able to shop around and really see what your options are and what's going to best fit your needs. The type of soil that you ultimately decide to go with might depend on what you have available and what your area is like. So for us here in the Pacific Northwest, we get a lot of rain, and the soil that is already here on the homestead is clay, which is really sticky and hard to get working with early in the season because it's so wet. It just globs up and it's disgusting mud, and it just really is not easy to try and work when you're trying to get plants in early. Now, that clay soil does have the ability to hold and retain some moisture for roots, and so that's where the no dig method is kind of nice, because if you have that compost on top, it gives you a nice layer to get your plant started in, and then they can tap down into the roots they can tap the roots down into that clay soil, which will help them to stay a little bit moister during the summer growing season. So there are benefits to having that clay soil. It's just a matter of trying to figure out how you can work things so it's going to be the best option for you. So think about your area and where you're at. If you don't have the rain situation that we have here, you might be looking for a type of soil that's going to help retain the water and retain the moisture more, whereas we're looking for things that are going to help drain and be a little lighter and fluffier. So it really just depends on your location, and I can't tell you exactly what's going to be best for you. Just take a look around and spend some time doing a little bit of research on the best type of soil for your area. The fourth consideration that you need to think about is your tools. So depending on the type of base and the type of garden that you're wanting to do, you're going to want to make sure that you have the proper tools on hand. If you're planning to do tilling, you want to make sure that you have your rototiller ready to go and that it's in good shape, and you're going to be able to work that ground as soon as you can. If you're planning to go with raised beds or container gardens, you really want to make sure that you have the proper hand tools on hand to help get you started. And we'll kind of go through some of these things, like I said, more in depth in future videos, but some things that you want to consider having: some different types of shovels, different types of forks. You might want to have some, you know, different kinds of things for scooping versus trying to kind of loosen soil maybe around the edges or things like that. And so just start looking now for some of the tools that you're going to need for whatever type of garden you're planning to use. I've been doing a lot of talking. I know this is a lot of information, and I hope it's giving you something to chew on and really think about. If you're getting some value from today's video, please remember to click that like button. And of course, if you want to continue to get information on some of these topics a little more in depth, don't forget to subscribe so that you can be alerted when I send out videos in the future. The fifth consideration that I want you to keep in mind is pest control. Now, this can cover a wide variety of things. The main thing that we have difficulty with here on the homestead is deer. So we're living close to a wooded area. We have a lot of wildlife and a lot of deer. Maybe in one of the upcoming videos, we'll talk a little more about some of the wildlife that we've been seeing around the area. But we have a lot of wildlife in the area, which is fantastic. It's beautiful and it's wonderful to be able to go out and enjoy that wildlife in your backyard, front yard, wherever it is around your homestead. But when it comes to having a vegetable garden, that can be really tricky if you're trying to figure out how to navigate enjoying the wildlife and enjoying your vegetable garden as well. So if you have a lot of deer around your area, you might need to put a fence up around your garden to try and protect your plants so that the deer aren't eating all of your plants. And hopefully they're not as friendly as the deer that we have around here, who, while they can't jump into the garden because of the fence, they like to try and pull the plants through the fence and eat the tops off of them, Brussels sprouts being one of them. So they're, you know, it's not foolproof by having a fence up or trying to do that, but it can really help to make sure that you're going to have the best chance possible in growing your garden. If you have a lot of moles or pests that are coming up from underneath the ground, if you're trying to do raised beds or things like that, you might have to look at some different control measures for that as well, and you might think about that as you're trying to put in your raised bed. So just think about what kind of wildlife you have around the area and what kinds of roadblocks you might run into when it comes to pests. Now, and the other thing I was going to mention in this category, and I'm not saying that people are pests or that your neighbors are pests, but if you are looking to set up your garden in town, you do want to think about the fact that not everyone respects the fact that that garden is on your property. And if you've got some lush berries or some beautiful produce right out in the front of your yard, they might consider that they want to just help themselves to that. So you may want to consider a fence, or if it's possible, to put your garden in the backyard so that you don't have people walking by it all the time. That might be a really good option for you as well if you're looking to try and set something up in town. The last consideration on this list, I should say, my dog is really into contributing to today's video. The last consideration that I want to talk about today would be the star of the show, plants. Now, as you're kind of working your way through this process, you're probably like, great, I'll just be able to go ahead and take care of those plants and put some seeds into the ground or buy some plants and put them in as soon as it's time for them to start growing. And that's a great first step, but you do want to really think through the process and what your weather patterns are and what you want to do for your first experience. So if you plan to purchase plants from the store, you have to remember that you're going to be buying individual plants, and that is going to be much more expensive than growing the seeds yourself. And if you live in a cooler climate like we do here, you may want to consider starting your seeds indoors in order to be able to put the transplants out a little bit earlier in the season so that you can have a longer production range and your produce will be ready to harvest before it's winter. Now, with that in mind, if you're going to start seeds, you want to think about what kinds of materials or tools you might need for seed starting. I know quite a few people have said, well, I'm just gonna put it in trays and I'm gonna set that in the window and it's going to be good to go. And that is one option that you have. You do have to be careful, however, that your plants are going to be in a location where you get enough light inside your house. And if you're not careful with that or rotating them regularly, you're going to end up with plants that are really leggy and falling over and just not quite as healthy when they're ready to go out because they weren't getting enough light. I think that it's really surprising how much direct light plants need versus what we think is coming in through the window. So just kind of keep those things in mind if you want to do vegetable gardening long term and you really want to have a setup that's going to work for you in the future. What do you need in order to get those plants started and be able to start seeds indoors? And again, we'll talk about more of these items in depth as we move forward. So these are 6 considerations that I wanted to bring to your attention if you are planning to start a vegetable garden this year. And if you are an experienced gardener, what is something that I left out of this list or something that has been really helpful to you when you've been considering planning your vegetable garden? Let us know in the comments down below. I would love to hear from each of you so that we can continue to share our knowledge and ideas together and help encourage each other to get started along this fabulous road of vegetable gardening. Until next time, thank you for joining me today, and I will see you next time. Bye, everyone.